Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar for today. The title of the webinar is Unpacking the Power of Data in Active Mobility, and this is organized by Trufi Association. I am Angela, the Volunteer and Admin Coordinator for Trufi, and I'm based in Ghana. We would like to know where you are joining us from. Please tell us where you are joining us from in the chat and also how you got to know about this webinar. Trufi organizes bi-monthly webinars to throw more light on areas of gender in public transport, decolonization of public transport, and etc. Today, we would be unpacking the power of data in active mobility. So just a little bit more about Trufi. We are an NGO that promotes sustainable transport. We help other organizations and also country planners in ways that they can take advantage of their public transport. We undertake projects to foster collective modes of transportation. So for us, while Trufi originally started as an open source project, we have our app called the Trufi app that is in a lot of countries. We focus on informal transport. We quickly realized that there are other core values and codes that we've developed and serves as powerful tools to advocate active transport. So not only we focus on the trotros, the Trufis, or the other forms of public transport in the various countries, especially the global south, but we also want to advocate for active transport as well. We have created a cycling and multimodal app that is tailored for cities in Germany. You can find that out, and our open source code is open source, so you can go to GitHub and type Trufi, and you'll be able to find all our codes there because we believe in open source. And also, we are actively involved in the research efforts to better understand and address road stress in bicycle users. This project was done in Quito, Ecuador, which we will talk more about, and we are very excited to tell you how we're able to come together, how to be able to address the road stress by bicycle users. Our first speaker is Taylor. Taylor is responsible for data science and analytics in ITDP Global Office. They work with models of urban passenger transportation at levels from different cities to the entire globe in projects such as the pedestrian first and the compact city scenario, which is electrified. Please, if you have any questions, you can put that in the chat, and also we would have a Q&A after this, so keep an eye on that. So Taylor, welcome to our webinar.
Thank you, Angela, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all attendees wherever in the world you may be. Thank you for joining us today, for taking the time out of your busy day to talk and think with us about data and active travel in cities. I'll be speaking today about local data, global standards, and the power of OpenStreetMap in particular as not only a data platform, but a data standard for describing the infrastructure that people use to walk and bicycle all over the world. I'll start by talking about other approaches that people use to map bicycle lanes and footpaths and some of the problems with these other approaches. And then I'll talk about how OpenStreetMap provides an alternative. Then I'll talk a little bit about how you can use OpenStreetMap, how it's very accessible for beginners, but also very powerful for advanced users. But first, Before I dive into this, let me introduce ITDP a little bit more. ITDP, or the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy, is a global NGO with offices in 8 world regions, from Mexico to Indonesia, advocating for sustainable and inclusive urban passenger transport, especially in lower and middle income countries that are growing where cities are growing so rapidly. I'm on the global team based in Washington, D.C., where I work, as Angela said, on data analytics to support the real work being done in our regional offices, and also to do advocacy at the international or national levels around the world. So to get started, let's talk about mapping bicycle lanes and footpaths. And you've all signed up to join a webinar about active mobility. I don't need to convince you that walking and bicycling is good. You already believe in walking and bicycling. And I also don't need to convince you that walking and bicycling infrastructure is necessary. I'm sure that you all already know that protected bicycle lanes, for example, are the most important factor in enabling people to bicycle for transportation, that the majority of people in the world would be happy to bicycle, but only on safe, protected infrastructure. So it's clear that we need this infrastructure, and it's clear that cities and decision makers need to know where this infrastructure is and have maps so that they can improve it. So how do they map their infrastructure? Well, one way that a lot of people map their bicycle infrastructure is for each city to have its own data standard, its own data format, its own map. This can be intuitive. You might think, oh, we are here in Fortaleza, Brazil. We need to make a map of our bicycle lanes. So we're just going to go out and start mapping it and keeping track of it ourselves. That works great for Fortaleza. But then as soon as you start needing to compare Fortaleza to Recife, to Rio de Janeiro, to Sao Paulo, you'll have a lot of trouble because each city will have its own standard. And if you wanted to use a map, a routing application on your phone to get directions using bicycling, well, the app on your phone isn't going to be able to read Fortaleza's bicycle data. It's not going to be able to read Recife's or Sao Paulo's. It'll only read data that's in a global standard. And so if many different cities or many different people use many different systems to represent data, we're left with chaos. An alternative is to rely on a single corporate system. Now, I'm not going to name names here, but these images are from probably the world's most popular online mapping platform. And you'll notice that in the image on the left here, there's one block, which I've illustrated with a street view image on the top, and another block I've illustrated on the bottom. The one on the top is marked on this corporate online map as having a bicycle lane. The one on the bottom is marked as not having a bicycle lane. The infrastructure is the same. This corporate entity has made a mistake, and we can't fix it. The city cannot just call up one of the largest corporations in the world and tell them to fix their maps. It'll take months or even years, or maybe it'll never happen. So the city has no control in this case. The data is just wrong. And so it's unreliable and it can't be fixed easily. So hopefully I've convinced you that we need an alternative. Fortunately, there is one. The alternative is called OpenStreetMap. It provides one global system that lets us have an orderly, organized way of mapping bicycle lanes and footpaths. And I'm focusing on bicycle lanes here, but I'm going to talk about footpaths a little bit more in a minute. So OpenStreetMap gives us an orderly system for mapping bicycle lanes and footpaths all over the world. You can see 6 different cities, from Berlin to Mexico City to, I think I put in Hong Kong or Tokyo, Washington, D.C., Bogota. And these are all mapped according to the same data specification and shared on the same platform. So OpenStreetMap is often described as sort of Wikipedia for Google Maps. maps. Oh, but it's more than that. It is not only a repository of standard data, it is also the data standard that is used to specify that data. And it is also a platform where that is hosted and made available to urban planners, to application developers, to programmers, and to the public. And it feeds into so many different applications and uses. If data for your city's cycling network is in OpenStreetMap, that means that somebody who wants to go out for a recreational bike ride on the weekend can use it to plan their route. It means that someone who needs to commute from one end of the city to another can find the safest and most convenient path for doing that. It means that city planners in your city can strategically identify the most important intersections or the most important neighborhoods to serve with new bicycle lanes. It means that ITDP and other international organizations can track your city's progress and help advocate to the United Nations or the World Bank or national governments and show the need for increased funding for bicycle lanes in your city. And it means that any programmer who wants to, an advocate, a technology office in a city, can easily access the data with easy to use tools that are already out there to make it easy to work with OpenStreetMap data in Python, in GIS, in R. OpenStreetMap is one of the most easy data formats to work with. So once the data is in OpenStreetMap, it can be used in all kinds of places for all kinds of purposes. OpenStreetMap is very actively maintained and very reliable compared to some of these opaque corporate systems that I was talking about a minute ago. It's edited by hundreds of thousands of people. It's relied upon by some of the largest corporations, Facebook, Mapbox. I believe TomTom uses OpenStreetMap data. Very large corporations rely on OpenStreetMap and can authenticate its quality. And hundreds of thousands of data points in OpenStreetMap are being created, modified, corrected every day. Hundreds of thousands of data points. Some people are concerned with the reliability of OpenStreetMap data. And some people are concerned with legal issues. And I'm going to make some suggestions about how OpenStreetMap can be used to address those issues. First, OpenStreetMap is if you are a city planner or an advocate and you're concerned about the quality of OpenStreetMap data, the most important thing you can do for your city is go on OpenStreetMap and correct the data and double check that it's correct. This will be easier than making a new map from scratch, and it will let the data be shared with others. Some people are also concerned about the legal issues. OpenStreetMap can only be used with data under a Creative Commons share alike license. If you want to talk more about the details of this, we can follow up. But in short, an option you have is to use the OpenStreetMap data standard, the specification, on your local government servers or your local servers, and then upload it and share it with OpenStreetMap, rather than relying on OpenStreetMap data, which has this open database license. So there are ways of using OpenStreetMap within a legal framework of public domain data. Anyway, I hope that I've convinced you now that OpenStreetMap is a great option when it comes to mapping walking and cycling infrastructure in a city. And I hope I've convinced you that you want to get started. It's very easy to get started. You can just open openstreetmap.org and hit start mapping. There's a tutorial in many, many different languages available that will walk you through the basic steps of how OpenStreetMap works and how to begin editing it. And then I've included these links, and I'll send around these slides after the presentation so that you can learn more about the specifics of how to map bicycle infrastructure and pedestrian infrastructure. It can take a little bit of effort to get started. It's still a technical task, but it's fairly straightforward and you'll get the hang of it quickly. So, and once you do get the hang of it, then we can start talking about somewhat more advanced cycling infrastructure and walking infrastructure. So if you're new to OpenStreetMap, you can maybe tune out for a minute here, but if you're experienced with OSM, I'd love for you to listen as I talk about advanced bicycle and walking tags. First, there's a new proposal for mapping physical separation of bicycle lanes, for not only specifying that a bicycle lane has a form of physical separation, but also how strong that protection is. Everyone who's ridden a bicycle in a city knows that a physical curb, a concrete curb, provides a lot more safety than a flexible post or a little bump in the road. So this cycleway separation tag lets mappers specify just how protected a bicycle lane really is, which is very useful for cyclists and for urban planners alike. If you are a speaker of Spanish or working in a Spanish-speaking country, ITDP has worked with our colleagues in Medellin to prepare a guide specifically intended for Latin American cities to map their bicycle infrastructure according to this specification. You can find it at the link below. Again, we'll send this all out later. For people who are more interested in infrastructure for walking, there's also a very detailed specification for walkability. And this really goes into all the details you might need to map disability access or access for people with physical impairments or other particular needs as they navigate their pedestrian environment. You can specify details like curb ramps, inclines, paving materials. There are many, many detailed ways of specifying all of this. And in fact, a lot of progress has been made in mapping this infrastructure in a handful of cities in the United States, as well as in South America. I believe Quito has done quite a lot to Quito, Ecuador, to map this infrastructure. Thank you so much for your time today, and thank you especially for all of the work that you are doing around the world to promote walking and bicycling. If anything I presented today is helpful for you, I'll be happy, and I'll be happy knowing that you are doing great work making the planet's cities safer and healthier for everyone. So thank you. And I think we'll have questions after Carlos speaks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Taylor, for talking about OpenStreetMap, how collaborative it is. We are so sorry we had a little bit of transmission issue from the beginning, but don't worry, we'll cover that up later on. So our next speaker, he is Carlos Felipe Pardo, and Carlos is a Colombian psychologist with an MSc in contemporary urbanism from the Lagos School of Economics. He specializes in urban issues, mobility, climate change, and technology. With his extensive experience in advocacy and policy, he has contributed to projects across the globe. He is a recipient of the Danish Cycling Embassy's 2018 Leadership Award and advises UNEP, World Bank, and many more. Also, he's the founder of Sabi Dua AR. And yeah, please, if you have any questions, you can put that in the chat. I would have a Q&A after these presentations. Carlos, over to you.
Hi, thanks a lot for giving me a chance to talk about this. It's a pity we couldn't listen to the first part of Taylor's presentation, but I know it was recorded, and I think we can sort of catch up on it a little bit later. So I'll be a little bit quicker than I planned so that we have enough time for this. I'm going to talk about a specific project to illustrate something that is really interesting about how to use data for active mobility, but I wanted to start by talking about a few issues that are, to my mind, fundamental to understand these things. So first of all, one of the things that I love about active mobility or riding a bicycle or walking is that I don't have any technological device or battery or cable of any sort. It is purely a low-tech mode of transport. It is a non-data or low data mode of transport, let's say, in and of itself. And I think that is something to rescue that I feel is very positive. But at the same time, I know that several cities around the world have been able to improve mobility conditions without even looking at the data. They just said, well, we have to prioritize cycling, we have to prioritize walking, we have to reduce the speed of motorized vehicles. And they did not use data for that, they just did it, right? So I think this is a positive thing to have in mind. However, I also feel that active mobility can thrive when we are able to use data and technology properly. I also think that if we don't do it, if we use technology wrong, then we can worsen conditions for active mobility. So it's a little bit of a tricky situation. How can we use technology and how can we use data so that we can truly improve conditions for people who are walking and cycling? I'm going to give an example of how technology can become a tool because it has been properly used. And we always have to bear in mind that we need to avoid forcefully applying data collection or technological devices onto people, avoid the invasion of privacy, avoid increasing the expenses of using a transport mode or a conversion process. So this is crucial to this whole question. And that is something that I need to preface any presentation around technology and active mobility, because I love the non-technology side of active mobility. Anyway, I want to talk about Cartagena, which many people know either because of its beautiful city center, its ugly beaches, or its annoying restaurants. I'm going to talk about cycling in Cartagena. This picture is one I took when we were doing a project with Despacio, which is an NGO that I led until a few years ago. When we began the project, we were looking at the data that they had, and we found that they had an OD survey, but the OD survey had 2 people riding a bicycle, according to the data that they had, which was really, really problematic because we knew that there were many more people using a bicycle. So we were wondering, why is it that there's no people riding a bicycle in the OD survey? Why haven't people found them? What is wrong here? So we started to sort of see how can we improve that and how can that data be much better in helping us learn about use of bikes. First, the infrastructure was as you see in the picture. In most cases, or in all cases, it was very dangerous to ride a bicycle, and it was poorly built for people walking. Of course, you see on the left supposedly a sidewalk, and cycling where there's no bikeway here. So that was sort of the first thing that we found out. What we did in this project that was led by several organizations and funded also by the Dutch embassy in this case, we began by getting as much data as we could. We got data points, almost 1 million data points during a month. It was through an app that no longer exists called Bico that gave you 1 point for every kilometer you rode. And what we said is that we'll give a bicycle to the person who collects the most points. Now the app was set up in such a way that only when you rode a bicycle it would count your kilometers. But in 1 month we got 1,500 users using the app, which of course showed us that it was not 2 people riding a bicycle. It was more than 1,000 people who were definitely using a bicycle because they had to use it or because for whatever reason. So in this was the first thing that we found that was very positive in looking at what was happening in the ground and what was truly happening in the city in terms of use of bicycles, thanks to starting to use an app and tracking people with their acceptance so that they could show us where they were riding. Now, what we found was, and this map on the right is sort of a summary of where people use the bicycle. The darker red means greater use. You can see when you look from the bottom right all the way to the middle left, you see that that is 15 kilometers or almost 10 miles of a ride. That was the most popular ride for people using a bicycle, which is really saying and really telling for what we were saying. I'm going to show you on the left a very basic animation that we did at that point, showing how throughout the day we start seeing people starting at 5 in the morning using a bicycle to get to where they need to go. Now, on the left is the city center, the very historic, very beautiful city center. And generally in the west is the sea and all the ocean of the city. And then you can see how throughout the day, there is a lot of people riding bicycles, mostly in the morning. And then if we go past, then we can see it a little bit more dense in the city center. So this is a very, very basic project done in 2017, where we were basically, I think, if not the first, one of the first projects to really use technology to track cyclists successfully and sort of see where they were. And this enabled us to do several things. One of the things that we were able to do was, if you look at the following graph, what this map is showing you is two things. What I showed you before, the redder color means that there's greater use of bicycles. And at the same time, the blue lines are the projected bikeways. Unfortunately, almost none of the projected bikeways were along the roads that people were riding a bicycle currently, which means that there's something wrong there. Because one of the things that was wrong was that they hadn't had access to any data around cyclists. And the only way that they were planning for bikeways was looking at what are the new projects that would come. And in those new road projects that would come, they would add a bikeway, which is positive in a way, but it wasn't addressing the needs of the people that we now knew were using a bicycle very frequently. So that was something important that we felt to show to the government and to tell them, let's start. Based on that, what we did is that we said, well, let's use this information so that we can start looking at design. So this is one design that we had, well, not a design. This is one of the roads or one of the avenues that we found could be useful to do a redesign. And what we did is started to do iterations on detailed designs or at least rough designs of what we wanted. People who know me also know that I'm very happy to show these diagrams made with a software that is open source and a free use called StreetMix. We use that software a lot in this project because it was very quick to arrive at agreements with key stakeholders around what would be the best designs that we could use. So I think that is a positive thing that we found also. So if you follow me and if you follow what I have, then it would be good for you to see. So first of all, it was the data collection. Then based on the data collection, starting to understand when to put, where to put or to design new cycling infrastructure. And then it would be designing, or at least beginning to design bikeways. The last thing that we did was that we started to look at which were ideas or specific examples of improvement and complementing transit. And what you see here is the BRT lines, the trunk lines are the purple line, and the dot on the east, so on the right, the blue bright dot is the terminal station. There's a lot of people living around the terminal station beyond the area where you can walk, so 500 meters or less than half a mile. And then what we did is that we said, well, what if we do a parking station for bicycles in the terminal? And theoretically, we found that we could increase the coverage area of having bicycle parking so that people from a very wider area could travel. So these are very, very basic examples. It's, of course, Taylor was very good at describing something very detailed, which is the open source standards and how to use that as a basis for detailed designs. And I really like to see how We have very detailed examples of doing things that are very complex, but that they are open source and they're free. What I was trying to show is basically entry level examples of using data and using technology to be able to improve the conditions for people cycling and walking uh, in cities. So that's everything that I wanted to share. Thank you for your time, and happy to take questions after all the presentations have been done.
Thank you so much, Carlos, for that presentation. Um, Trufi, we are into public transport and also active mobility as well. So we did a project where we also measured sensitivity of the cyclists in Quito and Ecuador. So it's very interesting to see your presentation as well. Our next speaker is Leonardo. He is the business manager in Trufi, and he would make a presentation, a short overview of some relevant work we are doing in Trufi in the areas of active mobility. And also, if you have any questions, you can please type them in the chat. And when it's time for our live Q&A, we would start with that. So, Leo?
Thank you, Angela. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. I'm Leonardo Gutierrez. I work in business development in Trufi Association, and together with the World Bank and Carlos, we made a project, a pilot project in Quito. This project is implementation of the technology of Trufi in the way of obtaining information from cyclists using OpenStreetMap like base, and using these opinions to improve the planification of the routes for cyclists. Was an initiative made by World Bank, and the main idea is planning routes with the cyclist voice, obtaining information for cyclists, and then use this information to calculate a network based in this opinion, and then make calculation and planification of data using this opinion of the cyclist. The main idea of the project was obtaining information in real time of the status of the roads of the city, specifically the roads that use the cyclists, obtaining information from different roads from the cyclists, and then based on this information, interpolate all the surveys for cyclists to recreate the data and create all the network of the cyclists ways in a city. That was the goal of the project, and we create a network based in these rated roads, and create a planning. We like the idea is obtaining a journey and then provide planning to the users, to the cyclists in the city. The main topics of the project is a project support by World Bank, and promote obviously the active mobility, and other important thing that produce this project is data from the planners of the city. These data can use to improve the planification of the data, and always obviously all the data is centered in the cyclist and the opinion of the cyclist. That's our project. It's a very fast introduction. Now the app that made these two things is called by Raking, and is available for Quito in this moment. All the network is calculated by Quito, but is open source, of course, like all the products of Trufi, and can be implemented in our city. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you so much, Leo. We are open for our live Q&A. If you have any questions for our presenters, you can please put that in the chat, and then I address it to them. Yeah. So there is a question from Ted. Are there any examples of multimodal transport systems in the global south? Bikes on buses, etc.
I guess, I mean, I can take this up quickly.
Yeah.
There are several examples. I mean, I'm in Bogota, in Colombia, and there's more than 9,000 spaces for cyclists to park their bicycles in mass transit stations. That is the most that I know in Latin America, though other places like Mauá in Brazil also have several thousand spaces in one spot. In Latin America, this isn't extremely common, but they're trying to improve multimodal access. Whereas in Asia, for example, in Guangzhou, I know that every BRT station will have some form of a bicycle parking and public bicycle station. So that is sort of one of the largest examples that I know. In general, it's still getting there, but there are a few interesting examples. Maybe Taylor would like to complement with other examples that he knows of.
Yeah, I have seen some. I'm struggling to remember an exact city right now, but I'm certain I have seen some examples of buses having this sort of front mounting bicycle racks so that passengers can bring their private bicycle with them on a bus trip. I've certainly also seen people just taking their private bicycles on BRT or on metro. I think probably the more promising example though comes around shared micromobility. There's a recent report by the World Resources Institute working with Transport for Cairo that I can pull up, where they examined the way that shared bikes or shared scooters, when they are provided around public transport, really multiply the effect of mass transport systems to get people to their final destinations. If you'll give me a second, I can pull that up and put it in the chat.
Okay, thank you very much, Leo. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that we have multimodal systems in Latin America, but the thing is, we have, or the point of view of Trufi is, if it is possible to make calculation or planification in multimodal systems in global south cities, and the answer is, it's a different question, but the answer is yes. We have now technology based in OpenStreetMap and in the experience to make calculation in a multimodal ecosystem. I think that for the global south cities or all cities is the next step in implement this kind of planifications.
Yeah. Thank you very much. The link to the transfer for Cairo that Taylor was talking about is in the chat, so you can have a look at it. So our next question is, can you provide examples of conversion experience when city transportation planners change their outlook with regard to cycling and cycling infrastructure? How was the conversion experience like when they change their outlook with regard to cycling and cycling infrastructure? I think Carlos can talk about that since there was a project around that area.
Yeah, because I answered the previous one, I wanted to know whether Taylor would like to take this up as well, or...
Sorry, I was just looking for more information about the micromobility. Yeah, I think we have seen some really exciting progress in cities around the world with city leaders and even national leaders really recognizing the importance of bicycling and walking. One example I'm especially excited about comes from Ethiopia and Addis Ababa, where they're not only announced but are really working toward plans to build a very extensive bicycle lane network that would cover most of the Ethiopian capital. I'm not sure that there's a single moment, though, that we can point to as a conversion moment. I think it's much more of a gradual process of building a movement, of building inertia, of showing success in one place, showing success in another, and yeah, and really building the momentum politically, using advocacy to build that momentum, to change the narrative around walking and cycling.
Yeah, I agree. So it's difficult to sort of say, well, this was a pivot, right? We like because of the way that Bogota has been doing stuff, it's become like this example for others to learn about. So a lot of people have come to Bogota to sort of learn about what is happening here, and I think that has helped a lot. It has been criticized to do that, but I think it's helped a lot for people to come and see, understand sort of what is the type of thing that they could do, and then when they come, they have these epiphanies because they take a bicycle and go on the bikeways, or they go on the Sunday Ciclovia, which is a car-free event of 80 miles throughout the city. So then they like that epiphany is very visible to them. Like you can see how they arrived in the city and how they left, and sort of at least in the mindset they've changed. How that has been really implemented in cities is more of a difficult thing to assess. Has it been immediate, or has it been sometimes gradual, or has it been just the epiphany and then they just can't do anything? Like I don't know that anybody has been able to assess that properly, but yeah, it is a useful question at least.
Yeah. Sometimes I think there isn't necessarily an epiphany, but a discovery. Because from your project, there was just two people. You discovered that there are more than two people that are actually cycling within the city. We have a related question. It's about the role of the bike advocacy organization. It says, what is the role of bike advocacy organization? Not necessarily matters.
Yeah, I can jump in there. I mean, I think that advocates, whether for cycling or walking or for whatever, are really the key driver through which the political momentum for change is built. It's I think the one really important thing we've seen in all cities where we've seen this spread of these more progressive planning policies is strong local, is like a dedicated group of local advocates working on it and pushing for it. In Colombia, I mean, it's easy to talk about Carlos's experience and Despacio's in my own city of Washington D.C. in the United States. There's been a lot of progress really driven by a local organization called Greater Washington, which is a small group, but I think has a really outsized impact because of its dedication. And the more that local advocates can push, I think the more it really opens up the possibility for city officials to make the change.
Yes. Thank you very much, Taylor. This question goes to Carlos. Okay. There's another question. What's the name of this bike tracking app?
I was responding in the chat, but the app I was describing was Bico. It no longer exists. The one that Leonardo described, I'll leave him to answer. But one thing that is important here is like that part isn't the difficult one. Like finding the app, you could even use Strava, and then Strava can let you download the GPX files. If it's a massive thing, then of course you have to find a way. But I think the important thing is to sort of know how you're going to collect, analyze, and use the data, and then go and say, okay, what does my app or what does my process need? Because many times what happens in these governments is that they say we want to collect data and they don't know what for. And there's actually a very good set of principles of data collection from the New Urban Mobility Alliance, and they basically say something that I agree with a lot. Only collect the data that you really need. Don't collect more. So I think when you know what you want, then you should go back and say, okay, what type of application should I use? And is this really the one that is going to get what I want? Rather than looking at the solutions or the apps and then say, I want to use that for something. But all of that to say, well, Bico was the app, it no longer exists. And then maybe Leonardo wants to describe. I know that Ted pasted the Bike Keto link for the Play Store, but maybe So bike ranking, Leonardo.
Yeah, thank you, Carlos. Uh, we have now the app available in the stores. But the important thing is that we can implement the expertise of expert like Carlos, how to collect data from cyclists. Because in some comments, someone mentioned that the collect data from some cyclists is hard. It's not an easy way, and we wish to create an app that use the technology of Trufi, that is a tested technology with the expertise of cyclists to regenerate um, a map or a specific graph or network for cyclists. That's the main thing. And the other thing that Carlos mentioned and I want to emphasize is the app is available, is open source and use open data, use OpenStreetMap, and all the data software codes are created from open source and is available for other territories that want to implement.
Yes, thank you very much. Our other question. Okay, so Carlos mentioned the risks of data cycling. Could you expand on your view of the pitfalls of relying data, too much data, too much on data for cycling planning and policy, or datafying or gadgetifying cycling itself? That is through tracking apps. How can these problems be avoided?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, and thanks for picking out that up, Thomas. I mean, there's some main principles of why or how we need to improve conditions for people cycling and walking, and we know that it is generally reducing the very high speeds of very heavy vehicles, improving the physical conditions of the infrastructure, if it's cycling or non-cycling, to make it better. Having data will improve conditions when we have the right approach, but only having data would not really help us a lot. Sometimes there's a lot of data being collected in OD surveys, as I mentioned, which I'm not entirely sure that they're very up to date in terms of statistically being significant when they recollect the data. So I'm sort of like always hesitant to see the OD data of a city because it normally misrepresents cyclists, and it sort of assumes that there are only pendular trips or only counts the pendular trips. So people who are going to an office and coming back, it doesn't account for several trips, which may be trip chaining. And as I said, like the Cartagena example is a stark, very strong example of, well, they only use 2 data points, like 2 people, to understand how many people were riding a bicycle and to plan around that. So I think that rather than saying don't collect data, it is understand why you're collecting it and how you're going to do it in such a way that it is a good representation, or at least good examples of things that you want to understand. And the second thing about gadgetifying, that is a very, very big concern. Like to me, having something that needs a battery in a bicycle, unless it's a light, I don't like it. For me, like I understand the very huge potential of e-bikes, for example, for certain people, but I don't like the assumption that we need some electronic device in a bicycle to make things better, especially when it means that they're tracking you or that they are requiring you to have the device on your bicycle so that you can circulate. That is very, very dangerous. And I feel that data could be so much smarter in the way that we learn about these people using bicycles without filling them with gadgets. I mean, there's a lot of examples of these backpacks that show a signal of where you're going, like a green arrow to the left or to the right. I find that repulsive. I don't think that's necessary in a city where we should be giving priority to people walking and cycling. So yeah, I think that's a danger, and you have to know how to use it. And thanks, that's a great question.
Thanks so much, Carlos.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Carlos. I think, if ideally we wouldn't need data at all. Ideally, city planners would just know, let's put bicycle lanes on busy streets. Let's slow down cars so that people can bicycle safely. You don't need data to know that. It's common sense. But often we do find ourselves in situations where city planners or mayors or governments are demanding data to back up a decision. And it's helpful for us to have maps to do that. It's helpful for us to have data to do that. Often we do find ourselves in situations where someone might want to make a bicycle trip and there's not a clear, obvious, safe way of doing that, and they might need a map or some data to find an alternative safe path. So I think ideally we wouldn't need data at all, but it is useful in convincing people or helping people to bicycle safely.
I want to mention something related with this question that is very interesting. In Trufi, we are a base organization, a technological base organization, and we need to fight against the gatering of the technology. And part of the project in Quito was exactly that: how we can create an app and a thing that can help the people, not only create another app or another technological gadget. And it's a thing important to develop the projects and to create a new technology in our environment.
Thanks so much for yep. We have yeah, Carlos, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So
We have
so I
4 more
know that.
minutes.
Yeah, so I know that Taylor is much more knowledgeable on this. I'll just say the exist so physically segregating infrastructure so that cyclists can ride is not the ideal situation, but rather something that you have to do when conditions are horrible, right? Which is a really big misunderstanding when it comes to planning for cycling inclusiveness. And that's why we need to understand how to make the infrastructure cycle inclusive and when it's needed to segregate. But then, yeah, I know Taylor can talk more about these things, so I'll let him handle it.
No, I mean that's right. I think that protected bicycle lanes are most important on wider streets, busier streets, more chaotic streets. I'm not sure that I fully agree that in theory, protected bicycle infrastructure should never be required, but that's maybe more of a theoretical point. And so it is a worthy goal to want to make a map of all safe streets for bicycling, including streets that are safe because of physically protected infrastructure and because of streets that are safe because of low speeds and low volumes of cars. You can get, in many cities, in some cities at least, you can get data on traffic speeds and volumes from the city officials, perhaps from a private company. It's often very expensive and very difficult to work with. And it's much easier to map the places that have protected infrastructure. And then you can compare, and then you can start with that map of protected infrastructure. So I guess the short answer is yes, low speed, low volume streets are an important part of the cycling network. However, it is difficult to map them and has pretty intense data requirements. And because of that, I think that focusing first on protected infrastructure on arterials and wider streets is a good place to start.
Thank you very much. To our last question, talk about safety. There's a question about safety of the cycling routes. So it goes like, not all safe cycling routes are bike lanes. They just happen to be safe streets. Does OSM have a way of helping find safe routes and that aren't dedicated bike lanes?
Isn't that the question we just answered?
But I think
think it's a bit
specifically,
different.
but I think specifically to the point of OSM.
Yeah, fair. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, and actually, I think there's one other thing I'd like to add, which is that there are so OSM only describes physical infrastructure. OSM has no data on traffic speeds and volumes. This is by design. This is a strength of OSM that it focuses on describing the physical world rather than on activity that happens over time. There are certain things that can be mapped in OSM that help make neighborhood streets safer. Intersection treatments, forgetting what they're called right now, but sort of those mandatory turns, those places where cars can't go straight through an intersection. They have to turn at the intersection, but bicycles can move straight through the intersection. I've seen a lot of these in Mexico City, also in, I believe, Portland or Seattle, United States. I can follow up with a little more data there. Otherwise, narrowing streets, slowing down traffic at the intersection through physical infrastructure, that is something that can be mapped in OSM and that you could use to interpret OSM data to identify safer neighborhood streets.
Yes. It's exactly time. But before we close, do we have any questions any additions to what we have presented or talked about so far?
So I have one quick thing to say. I mean, I hope that people learn more about using data and actually not necessarily how to program, because that may be super boring, but the potential of having open source software available, promoting its development and use so that we can really improve mobility in the world, which is why I like talking to Trufi people, because that's what everybody's about. So I hope that many more people learn more about that, so we can get more Trufis out there, even if they compete with Trufi. I think that's a good thing.
Yes. Taylor?
Just a big thank you to you, Angela, and to Leonardo and the rest of the folks at Trufi for organizing this. And of course, the most thanks to the attendees for their interest in the topic and their hard work around the world.
Thank you so much. Very much appreciated. Leo, you have the opportunity to close the meeting, close the webinar for us. So your last words are the last words.
Yes, say thanks to Taylor and Carlos. We are very happy to invite them to these webinars. Is always greeting. Always, we are always happy to share the stage with experts like them. And in Trufi, we are very happy of continue development of our technology, and is available for all. And I want to emphasize that we are working all this with open data, open software, and it's available for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope everyone has a lovely day, or enjoy the rest of your day. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.